Hi everyone. Today for our live, I want to bring in a carving demonstration. So I got four vases here, and I'm gonna be carving and talking as we go with moments where I'll just be carving so then you can really get familiar with the movement and your mind can really understand what is the speed, the pressure by seeing this repetition. So I'm going to start with this little piece here. Uh, I believe that most of them are in the perfect consistency. So first thing we're going to check here. When I press on the rim, which is often the part that dries quicker, I still can shift the piece a little bit, but it's hard. It's not a moment that I would be shaping my piece anymore. And on the bottom, same thing. So let's see how it goes, and I'll go talking about other things. Um, just for reference, I have here, so sometimes I'm going to be looking to the right just to see how the image actually is. So this one here is my P10, which is one of my favorite ones from Diamond Core. These ones are a variation of the P2, which is round and smaller. This one here is called P11 and it's pointy. I'm thinking of actually starting with this one. Let's start with this one. So checking how firm my tool is, it's pretty good. I like the angle. And then here, I'll start from top to bottom and we go. Let me see if you can see that. Yes. So I always start from the top of my piece, not from the side. So from the top. And what I'm looking for when I'm carving is basically removing all the external surface of my piece and creating a full new pattern. So that's my goal. And it's always very personal, but to me, what I do is you probably can start seeing here the pattern forming. So I go in a bit of a flow. This tool, particularly the P11, it can be a bit tricky because it goes deep and in quite a lot. So it's the kind of tool that I wouldn't recommend for you if you're just starting with carving. Give yourself a couple of goes and make a few pieces with a wider shape first because it's more forgiving. And then you just build up your trust that you know where you're going with your piece. So as you can see, I go in a bit of a similar stroke, let's call, similar size, but I try to be mindful of not creating necessarily a full straight line here. I like it to have a little bit of movement. And then if sometimes I notice that both my carvings are open a bit on a diagonal, what I do is I come right in the middle of that and do a straight line, and then I come catching. But I'll just blow my nose because I've been sneezing a lot, and it's Ah, I'm back. Sorry about that. So back. So now that I have this middle line, what it does for me is makes that when both sides are joining, there is not a big difference of all the carvings are coming straight and then some carvings come on an angle, and then I'm going to have a hard time joining it. By creating this line here, if there's a little bit of an angle, the carving will merge more gently. And with carving, like any other thing, I think, the best way is really practicing it. And the more you do, the more you know what to do when you hit a little corner or something like that. Because as you see, like you start carving, and in the beginning is all fine, but when it gets to the final row or the final bit of some carving, it's often when you really need to think about the finish, you get surprised with some little details that you might didn't think about it before. And now, when we come to the second row, what I personally like to do is I find where is that both of the previous carve merge, and let's say there'll always be a bit of a pointy bit. I line up the tip of my carving tool with that pointy bit. And the reason why I do that is because if I kind of like just follow exactly the same line that I did before, it looks more like one really long carving rather than a texture that is alive and kind of talks to you a little bit when you look at it. So my goal is not going in a geometrical type of carving. Some people do it really, really well. I just find that it requires a lot of thinking and planning and tension and goes against like my preferred way of working. So that's why I don't do it. And here, one thing that I want to emphasize is sometimes when you're carving, you notice that there are little bits that kind of flake off and run up and down. And don't don't go on the impulse of just like, oh, let me just clean here, let me just take it off. Because as the clay is still a little bit soft, if you come with your finger and you try to clean these little bits that are coming out, what happens is that you actually end up pushing them back in. And with that, you can't get rid of it later. But if you leave it here and allow for the piece to dry, later on, you can easily remove these little bits. Now, what I'll do for a better angle is bring my other one, my other bending wheel. So then I have my piece a bit more in front of me. And then I just keep, let me just type this one up. So just one is spinning. And then I just keep following it. And one thing that I noticed wasn't really intentional, but the length of my strokes often change a little bit depending on which part of the piece I'm working with. So right here, which is the widest part of my piece, I'm going for smaller strokes, and you probably can see that you can kind of see a line on them, but it's not an obvious straight line. And that's something that I notice. It feels more natural in a way. As you look into some patterns in nature, let's say something like a tree or sand and things like that, it has a sense of order, but it's not necessarily geometrical. For sure, you have many of geometrical patterns in nature as well. But to me, the important thing with carving and um, patterns in general is creating harmony. And I love this carving. It's always so unique. Now we get into the bottom of the piece. What I'll do is I'll bring my whole piece closer to the end of my wheel so my hand has a space to move freely. Because otherwise, what happens is your hand movement, come a bit more to the side here, gets limited by the bending wheel. And like that, I'll just keep flipping my piece and go with a rhythm that follows the piece. I'm always aware of how thick my piece is, and that helps me a lot with minimizing the risk of carving through. Yet doesn't mean that never happens. It rarely happens, but still sometimes does. So if it does happen with you, it's okay. Like once it happens as well, what happens after that? So let's say you're just carving in a flow, it's happening, and then all of a sudden you went too deep and poked a hole on your piece. From there onwards, you'll be much more aware of how much you take off and how much you leave, and feeling your piece in and out and getting familiar with different areas of your piece and what would be, let's say, your tendencies when you hand building. So then you know how your pieces often are shaped. And now that we get into the bottom, what I would suggest is have a look inside of your piece and have another look outside as many times as you need. So then you can really imagine and envision how much clay you have on the bottom. What I do often is I just put a light pressure with the top of my hand. So then when I come bottom to top, there is no chance of my piece flipping or moving because sometimes happens that your tool grabs a little grog or just you go a bit deeper and that energy can really flip the piece. And I don't want that to happen. It has happened with me many times. So now I'm coming from bottom to top, also from the extremities of the piece to the middle. And it's looking really good, but I noticed that I missed a couple of little bits. So I'll just come and catch them. And here I'm gonna keep moving, taking the excess and creating the pattern. And exploring here, the reason why I do this carving from the bottom to the top and do not just follow from top to bottom the same direction is when we are carving and when removing clay, if we go like that, this little part here will kind of like, it's as if you were, is it the difference in between cutting paper with a sharp pair of scissors versus ripping paper? I think that's the best way of putting it out. So what we want is to be gentle with our piece. So then we know that the finish will be the finish that we want. And I just keep moving here. And every time I'm carving, I'm also, as you might notice here, holding the inside of my piece to flip it. And the reason to do that is because with smaller pieces, the outside is still very gentle and fragile. If it was a bigger piece that I was doing a carving in sections or days, you probably could touch the outside and wouldn't compromise. But the reason why I do not touch the outside of my piece is as I'm creating this whole new pattern, I don't want it to get damaged or not look as sharp with fingerprints and things like that. So now let's bring it to the middle and have an overall look. Because sometimes I notice that I want to come and take a few little extra bits just because a few bits are not like aligning with the pattern, but on and on, I think it's really good. And now I'll remove this one, put it here. Let's put it around here. And we're gonna go for a second one. So here I have three vases that are very similar in size. That's a practice that I do at times, which is how consistent is my technique? Could I make this piece again? So that's an interesting practice if you feel like. So let's start here. And I want to show something that happens with this shape. And it's something that's that makes the possibility of changing the angle of my carving tool really essential. So here, notice how my hand follows that curve. Hold on. Notice here. So you can see that I come down and I really follow that curve to create this harmony on the transition that we have in here. And with time, this process and this movement gets very natural. In the beginning, not so much, but practice, you know. So I'm coming, my clay is on the edge of a little bit too soft for this piece. Can you see that is getting stuck to my tool? So that's a sign. You don't need to always clean your tool, but definitely if your tool is cleaner, you have less particles to look after later. So I wouldn't carve my piece if it was any softer than that. I want to show you something here. Might be hard to see, but right here, I hit a little air pocket. So what I'll do is, and it's great that happened, I'll just come in and follow this same movement of carving, but I just go slow so I can guide that clay into the spot. Perfect. And like that, it just corrects itself. So sometimes it happens, and that's for me the best way around. Other thing that I find handy is, can you see that my finger is in here as I'm carving, kind of supporting. So this finger here is here, very much where I'm carving. And what it does is it gives you a feedback on how much clay you have in between your tool and your finger. Because every time that I'm coming with my carving tool, it's creating a feedback into my finger. And that is a really handy way of knowing how much can you take or how little should you take. And here now I got a feeling, I know how much clay I've got. And again, I'm lining up the tip of my tool with a join in between two carvings. So let's just say here, I'll create these little lines so it's a bit more obvious. So that's where it joins. Excuse me. So can you see those little lines? So that's where I'm lining up my tool to make that pattern. Ah, I'm sneezing a lot today. Anyway, um, let's go here. Not yet. Ah, okay, getting back into it here. So the clay that I'm using for this one here is a smooth stoneware. It's called number 10 here in Australia. I'm hitting a little bit of a too wet little for it, or the tip for it is do the movement even faster. So then the carving does not get stuck in there. Because if you go slow, it's less likely that that little carving can go. See here, it got stuck. When it does happen, you have two options. You can try to take it off, but it's really stuck. And then what I do like that, I come again and then I carve again. And you might see here, it's kind of a carving with the carving, but that's okay and it works. So let's move a little bit more. and getting a flow. Sometimes happens that there is a little particle, a little grain of something, and you see that it scratches the surface of the piece. And when you're carving um, a body of clay that is more groggy, that's something that really happens. And you have two options. One is you embrace it and you see that you have some little carvings throughout, or you can kind of fight against it a little bit. If it's not happening that often, and when it happens is a huge scratch, what you can do is again come back with your tool and just follow that carve, and it should smooth it a little bit. So it does depend on the body of work, where you're going with it, um, to see if it's really worth it or not. Because when you're carving, and you probably notice that, you start getting in a little bit of a flow state, you know. You just move one movement after the other, and because you are so focused on where you're placing your tool, your eyes are always in a way busy or occupied with where is this next stroke happening, and how is my carving tool um, positioned to get out all the external surface. And that's why, in general, if I'm like making pieces that I know I'll be carving them, I don't really worry too much with the external surface unless there's some cracks or some areas that can really create a bigger damage. But this clay is super soft and satisfying, would benefit of a little bit more drying time. I made them on Friday, today's Monday, but I left them covered because I wanted to keep them in a good state for this carving. But because the weather just flipped here, it could actually be uncovered overnight, just from yesterday to today, but still doable. But notice that is a little a touch sticky. And when it's not, it's even better. But I rather carving with my pieces and my clay one touch softer rather than too dry. Too dry is often a little bit of a challenge because it creates other patterns and it's hard on the hand as well. So now, as you can see, I brought my piece into the end, and instead of going on a row just for logical movement, I'm gonna go all the way down and come here, bring it up. So I'll do all the surface that is overhanging, and then I'm gonna come and meet my carvings as I keep going. And I find it's really interesting how different it looks with different tools and different motions. So, one exercise that I suggest if you are into carving and you want to explore a bit more is using just one tool. Notice how the length of your strikes, the angle, and all the other elements can really give you a completely different texture despite using the same tool. Because that's an interesting exercise even to understand what is your personal preference. So I'll let you look at it a little bit. I'm going to blow my nose again. Sorry about that. I'm not sure, but we're here. So let's keep moving around. And again, if you are new into it, strongly recommend look inside of your piece, look outside, because this region here, it's often a easy spot to go too deep or deeper than what you actually have room in your piece. So keep mindful of that. And maybe as well because the angle when you're coming from the bottom to the top like that, there is a tendency of taking a lot of clay because kind of like as the carving tool gets in, as if was like the clay bites the tool in a little bit and wants to take more. But again, practice and familiarity with your piece, your personal tendencies on how you build your piece and things like that will really help. For this last row of carvings, I often like to give a little bit of a longer strike because I find that it kind of elevates the shape as a whole, gets more elegant, in my opinion. I was reflecting about my style and my sense of aesthetic and all of that, and it got really clear to me that what I like are simple things, um, and like the beauty of simple things. So I think that's why I'm quite particular about the shape, the angle, the carvings, the finish of the colors, and like all the elements. Because when you're working with a simple piece, in a way you have um, many nuances that wouldn't be if the piece had more into it. Like that said, when we think about carving, now that I finished my whole piece, what I'm doing is just looking for any areas like around here, for instance. Not sure if you'll be able to see, maybe, yeah. There's a little bit of a bump, and I want to be a bit more of a harmony on this angle. And to me, that's really where it comes to finishing your piece and making your piece gentle, harmonic, beautiful, even though it's a simple shape, it's a simple carving, and all of that. So the magic with the simplicity is really the attention to each detail. And again, things that are noticeable for me and don't look beautiful in my eyes could very much be beautiful for you and you like it. And again, it's very personal. It's what I like, and to me, is the point of how good can I make this piece? What is the best expression of this work? And that's how I roll with my work. I can see that this piece is a little thicker. I have more wall here and inside as well. So I can relax a bit more and really go deeper into this one. I can sense that by the overall thickness of the piece and feeling it. And again, starting from the outside to the inside. The other thing that's really important that I didn't mention yet in relation to carving is when you're carving with, let's call it the right pressure and the right speed on each movement, what happens is it kind of burnishes the piece. If you're not familiar with burnishing, um, it would be very much like polishing. So as you carve, you can see that there is like is nearly a reflection of the light of my room into each carving, because this part of the tool kind of really polished it. And I think that brings, even though we're gonna cover these carvings most of the time, that brings another quality into the piece and the elements, which is this sharp cut. Is again like if you were cooking or making something, cutting with a sharp knife versus cutting with a knife that is struggling is a very different thing. And when I first started carving, I did not have a good tool. And well, I think I just had wheel throwing tools. And it's a very different experience. So if you want to give a good go into carving, I would definitely recommend all the diamond core tools, which are super versatile. But if you don't have access to it, the mud tools have really good carving ones. They do not have, you don't have the same ability of change the angle of the carving head, but yet is a really great tool and goes a long way. So you can see now that this second row wasn't so wet and got a little bit more of a flow. And then the other thing to put in perspective is if you go for longer carvings, you're going to finish your piece sooner. If you go for shorter carvings throughout, will take longer. To me, and my preference and personal sense of beauty, on smaller pieces like this one, I do not like too long carvings, whereas similar shape and a bigger piece, then I would go for double that. Here I have carvings in between 1.5 centimeters up to 3, but that's something that I'm just now actually noticing to tell you. I never really stopped to think about it. It's just what feels right. Hold on. And again, let's keep going here. Um, I often work in a constant angle, like I'm moving my piece, but not necessarily. I could come back here and go the other way around. So again, see what works for you. And if you hit a part of your piece that's slightly too wet and is not working so well, is getting too stuck, just stop, put your piece on the side if you can, and come back. Sometimes a few minutes, like 20 minutes, can make the difference that you need to have a more enjoyable carving. And again, when it comes to carving, it's gonna be you understanding your relationship with your body of clay and your tools and the dryness and all of that. To me, there are lots of stages in between a soft clay and a dry clay on what is called leather hard. I do believe that there are a few stages of leather hard, but you understand as you go. It's simple. If your clay is too wet, the carving is gonna get stuck all the time. And if it's too dry, will be hard to carve, and it's likely that will be creating little lines throughout. So now I'm gonna keep moving here. And I wanna bring up one important thing. With this bottom carving, I often take quite a bit, like that would be the best way to show. The angle, the way that the carving looks is very thin on the end and thicker on the bottom. And that's why I'm taking more on the base to really elevate the piece. I know that I have enough clay there because I left it there to give me structure, when I was building my piece, but now I don't need it anymore. I still have quite a bit of clay on the base of my piece because I think it gives stability. The piece can be styled with flowers if that's something that you want, and won't be like tipping over and things like that. Just makes the piece substantial, like it really has a center of balance. And now getting closer to the end on this one. You can see that the movement is continuous, and if you go faster, it often helps not sticking in this little slightly wet stage. And now I'm looking for the overall, and to be honest, I feel like it's good. Let's put this one down and get my last one for today. And same idea. I'm gonna start from the top and keep moving. I'm creating these pieces for a small collection that I'll launch soon. So I want to have a few pieces on a similar size. And one thing that's really interesting, I decided to get to these small pieces because since I moved to my new house, I noticed that I had so many niches, spots that would very much need and receive a small vase. And I didn't have any because I've been making larger pieces so often. So that's me now noticing that small pieces have their place. They are needed, they change a space. So I decided to make some for me, and I'm making some to launch a collection too. And it's really interesting. If you want to develop a new shape, I strongly recommend trying in a smaller proportion to really feel and understand if that's really the shape that you're after and where you want to go with your body of work. Because small pieces are so easy, versatile. And then if you do not like any angle or proportion, you can easily work that out for your bigger piece versus making a bigger piece just to get to the end and figure out that the proportions are not what you want. Because one thing that I noticed just recently working in the studio and having some friends around, making a piece out of ceramics is something that everyone can. Like we start, we make pieces, and we understand the logical and all of that. But getting really intentional about the shape that you're going to create and being able to create that shape again, it's really a skill that you develop. And it does take a bit of time and experience and familiarity with the medium. So, wherever you are in your journey, just remember that making a smaller, kind of a prototype piece can be really great at understanding how to improve that shape before going all the way and making a bigger piece. So the weather is a bit wet here again, it's raining, and probably if I left these pieces uncovered and open, I could very much come to carve them by the end of the day, and they would actually be in my preferred stage, which is when all carvings just fall out of the tool and they really never get stuck. That's to me the best um, consistency and humidity level into your piece for carving. So if you can, give yourself the best of the best. And the only way to really know is coming and carving a little bit. So always go for the carving and feel. And if you have the opportunity to stop and do something else and come back, I recommend because the experience is So satisfying. This texture that I have here is quite satisfying still, but as you can see, every now and then, a little carving gets stuck. And enjoying that we are getting to the end of this piece, I want to talk about how to look after all those little bits that you can see. Because if I look at my piece now, as I'm getting to this carving row here, there are lots of little bits, little dusty bits of clay. And the way around is you actually let your vase dry, or your piece, whatever piece you're making. And when it's dry, they just really flake off. So it's really, really interesting because as you dry the piece, all these little dusty, flaky bits will easily come out just with a rub of your hand. And the other thing that I often do that to me is very like satisfying is you get a cloth, any kind of cloth, from a microfiber to linen, whatever. And you come and you're gonna do a movement as if you were sanding your piece. It's important that you have a mask because it gets very dusty. But with that, what happens is you can take all these little bits out without compromising the shape. Because if we come now, or say if you sponge it to remove it, you're gonna really remove all that sharp carving that you created. But if you come with a dry cloth later on, what happens is you give your piece that sharp look still, but you remove all those little bits that you don't really want there since they compromise the overall simplicity and finish of your piece. So let's go now bottom to top. And at times, when I'm coming and merging top to bottom, bottom to top carvings, there are some little details that sometimes I don't really like, and I come back and refine it. So notice that because once you change the angle of the carving, on the sense of you coming like bottom to top, and then you all of a sudden go top to bottom again, it changes the pattern of the carving. And that's something that back then, it used to frustrate me quite a bit. But now I found my way around. So I go for my long carvings here, and I have this little row that still needs to be carved. And then I just come and unify these two motions that came in different angles but have the same shape. In that way, I like better how the carvings come together. So all of that's very nuanced, and you see what you like, what you don't, or if bothers you at all. And then I'll just keep moving here. Again, this bottom one I like, and you can see how it does elevate the piece. One thing I also want to mention, since we're talking about nuance, details, and finishes, I now got my eye quite familiar to it, but anytime that you are creating a piece in this state, it's okay that your piece looks a little bulky and not so refined, because as we send the pieces to the kiln and get them fired, what happens is that shrinkage really changes the shape of the piece into a more refined, elevated shape. So just keep that in mind. And if you're already creating something that is kind of tall, fine, and all of that, is likely that it will be even finer and taller proportionally, even though it will shrink. Because it shrinks in all directions, the overall, in my opinion, will look taller. But again, see what you like, see how much you can control and change. And give yourself this little challenge of making two of the same piece and see how you go. See if you like one better than the other. What were the aspects and what would you change or not? So here, just finish the last one. And so with the carvings as well, I always aim to clean my table as soon as possible because otherwise they become very dusty and hard to clean later. But that's the basic with carving for me. Finding your flow, having a confident stroke, understanding your language in terms of texture, your preferred tools, and never sponging after carving. I think that's the most important thing to mention. Because there is a tendency of like, oh, I'll just come with this sponge and I'll refine this little bit. And the sponge will really kill the vibe of the carving. So, yeah, I hope that was insightful, helpful, and made sense. And also, as you're listening to me, but you're visualizing the emotion, it's getting familiar and your body is processing that as something that you've seen before. So I hope that also helps with your next time carving. And yeah, have a great day and thanks for being here.